we're looking at socio-emotional development, it only makes sense to start with Erikson. So take a look at all the blanks, and without peeking, hopefully you should know most or all of them. And then we'll concentrate on this, the stage associated with the age group we're looking at, that is middle childhood. So I know it's easy enough to count, but I would like you just to know off the top of your head how many stages are associated with Erikson. So hopefully you put 8. And are they psychodynamic, psychoanalytic, social, psychosexual? Hopefully you quickly and easily said to yourself psychosocial. First stage is trust versus mistrust. Stage 2 is autonomy versus shame and doubt. And I did allow 2 hints on the stage 2 and 3, leaving 1 word left. Probably next time I would take them all out. Stage 3, initiative versus guilt. And the stage that we'll focus on for this particular part of the module, industry versus inferiority. Ages 6 to 11, which is a perfect correspondence to middle childhood age. So let's consider Erikson's industry versus inferiority stage. Industry, a sense of being able to do things and to do what you set out to do. Self-efficacy, believe that you can actually meet the demands of a specific situation. You might say, wasn't that self-esteem? No, that's a global thing, not tied to any particular activity. Self-efficacy is specific. Do you have a self-efficacy at driving versus writing a good introduction paragraph to an essay versus being able to use the library as a research tool versus being able to, I don't know, change the ink cartridge on your computer. So more specifics. It should also include a hopefully positive self-concept, pride in your accomplishments, the opposite possibility is inferiority, that you have low self-efficacy in many things, a negative self-concept. Don't feel pride in what you've done. Maybe you have an external locus of control. You say, well, it's not me. It was just that, the group did a nice job. I didn't do a nice job. Or feeling inferior to things that you were not able to tackle successfully. So let's consider some of the many changes that occur in the school years. Industriousness, as mentioned in the Erikson view of this age. Changes in self-concept. So self-concept of early childhood was often focused on daily activities. I go to school, I play video games. Also in physical characteristics like I have braces or what have you. The middle childhood child is going to look particularly at their personality. I'm introverted, I'm extroverted, I'm cautious, what have you. And a focus on what you do typically well. I'm a great gamer versus I am very good at school or I'm very good at soccer. So not just the activity, but the things particularly that you're good at start to define you. With this goes a greater self-understanding of who you are and your place in the social sphere. Increasingly importance of friendships in terms of that person. And shifting in the parent-child relationship. Let's consider the influence of culture, gender, and ethnicity in terms of self-esteem and self-efficacy. Let's start with Black children typically score as having higher self-esteem. This is typically instilled in them intentionally by their parents to help protect against other people's implicit bias, as well as absolutely overt racism, including systemic racism. Now consider girls in general have less self-efficacy in math and science. Studies are clear. All you have to do is suggest to girls when taking a particular test, boys tend to do better in this test. The girls' scores plummet. We can see the same thing with children of color. All we have to do in a research paradigm is suggest that their particular group does less well than other children, and again, you'll see those particular students' scores plummet. So various groups, including women and people of color, are very susceptible to what's called stereotype threat. This is the idea that the pressures of the stereotype will actually damage performance. Friendships also change from people who like me to people that have similarities in terms of interests, in terms of includes where they live, what they do, what their hobbies are, and so on. Friendships in middle childhood change from people who like me to people that are similar. Unfortunately, this means that children are starting to self-segregate by race and ethnicity, and this tends to increase in pace across the elementary school years. So cross-racial friendships actually decrease in likelihood as the child gets older during these years. What can teachers do? Well, have students do group activities in which they break up cliques, and with familiarity, as you might have learned in intro psych, breeds liking. So mere exposure effect, the more you get exposed to somebody, the more you tend to like them. So in part, teachers can help to start friendships that could quite last these entire years. We'll consider peer acceptance on this slide and the next slide. Peers are increasing in their importance during this age group. Very rough estimates are that 20% of children have trouble making or keeping friends, while another 5% are absolutely friendless. Children with such issues as autism spectrum or ADHD, and that does of course overlap somewhat, have particular trouble in the friendship area. Friends are powerful predictors of adjustment. Later in life, we'll see that it has a strong impact not only on mental health, but also physical health and even longevity. Children in middle childhood can easily rank their peers in terms of popularity, which will bring us to our next slide. Let's consider the different categories of peer acceptance and who these children are. The popular children with many positive votes. Rejected children receive many negative votes. That falls within two categories. That are rejected because they're aggressive. These are the bullies. But they're also rejected because they're withdrawn and more likely to be the victims of bullies. The controversial kids have a mix of both likes and dislikes when rated by their peers. The neglected children are seldom mentioned positively or negatively. And average children receive a middle number of votes, which is most common. If you want to say average, you are indeed right. 1/3 of a typical classroom, students would fall in the average category. So let's consider bullies and their victims. Most physically aggressive bullies are boys, whereas most verbally or relational bullies are girls. Verbally would be taunting, belittling, name calling. Relational is intentionally excluding from groups to intentionally inflict harm. Bullies are social powerful. They may or may not be admired. So remember that in terms of bullies, they can be rejected because of their aggression, or they might fall into the controversial category in which they're admired by some and disliked by others. Victims are more likely to be passive, to lack defenders, so lacking friends that might support them. Withdrawn could be the result or a cause in part of the bullying, are more likely to be physically frail, particularly the male aggression. Overly protective parents, which might contribute to this actual problem of bullying, they do have a higher risk of depression and suicide. I do probably need to go back to bullies for a second, mentioning studies when bullies get to be late teens or in their early 20s. Most physically aggressive bullies, that is the boys, by late teens or early 20s, have actually been arrested for various illegal acts. So bullying is no good for the bully, as well as obviously no good for the victims. Intervention: help children form friendships and teach peer interventions. Should be done by both parents and by teachers. Let's consider birth order as studied by famous theorist Alfred Adler, a student of Freud's. We'll start with firstborn. Consider the parent of the firstborn. They're anxious, they don't know what they're doing, but they also want to kind of show off, my child is this age and can do that. My child can do this. So with firstborn, there's a lot of pressure to excel based on the child. But also the child, since they have no siblings, is just hanging out with adults, and that does lend for research suggesting higher IQs. So anyway, you're more likely to have greater achievement in school, more likely to have greater achievement in academics. If you look at measures of achievement, whether it's being the Apollo 13 astronaut or being the who's who in America, which lists famous scientists and politicians and business people, etc., mostly firstborns. So again, you've got a lot of achievement push, but you also have being in the limelight, and then when the next child comes along, basically losing all that attention. So firstborns often do have a certain degree of social skill issues, we'll say. Consider the middle child. I always think of the Brady Bunch. It was quite popular when I grew up. And Jan, the middle child, complained about Marcia, Marcia, Marcia. So the middle children often feel lost in the crowd, not getting their fair share of attention, family resources. Is it imagined or is it real? It's real. Hand-me-down clothes, hand-me-down toys, and often just not enough parental attention. Sometimes they tend to find ways to get attention that the parents might not care for. It might be changing the religion, getting that special tattoo or piercing, getting arrested, and my students tell me is particularly good. So often driven to find ways to stand out. Now the strength of the middle child is their great social skills. They have younger siblings, they have older siblings, they have all the friends of all the siblings. So often they have exceptional social skills and often do well in jobs that require exceptional social skills. Consider the youngest. What are they? They're the baby. Whether they're 8 or 18 or 48 or 68, they're always the baby. By the time the baby comes along, often the parents are worn out. It's easier to say, dress your sibling, dress your sister, dress your brother, than it is to have them do it on their own. So they're often used to being taken care of. They're not stupid. They know how to use the system. Let's lastly consider the only child. Which child do you think the only child is most similar to? Ponder that for a second. The only child is most similar to the firstborn because every firstborn is an only child for quite a while until the next sibling arrives. So they have the same achievement we associate with the firstborn, and they also have social skills issues that we also associate with the firstborn, but different social skills issue. Think of all the life lessons you get from having siblings. And this is not to say that the only child can't learn them. Maybe they learn them from summer camp or the kids on the block, religious camp, whatever. But they're less likely to learn some of those skills we get from siblings. Think for a moment. What do we learn from having siblings? Actually think about it. Sharing, yes. Compromising, yes. Turn taking, yes. Fighting, but then making up. So a lot of things we learn from siblings, the only child may or may not have in their repertoire. I love to apply this information to who you date and or marry or become a partner with. firstborns, what would you expect? Well, higher achievement, which might be a higher paying job. On the negative side, maybe the job is a priority and maybe the relationship less so. Also, maybe the social skills issues, so you have to remind them of the birthdays and the keep up friendships. The middle child, we said high social skills, so maybe too much of a social butterfly. You might have to ask, have your friends not come over every weekend, or have your friends not call after 10 o'clock at night, or can we do things occasionally alone without your friends? The youngest child, used to being taken care of, so they might be maybe a little bit more, some circumstances, high maintenance, expecting you to be more like their staff than their partner. The only child, well, didn't have the compromise, so you might have to make more compromises in terms of which apartment, which house, which movie, which restaurant. Fighting and making up, so you might have to do the apologizing when it's really their fault because they're not going to give in, they're not going to make up, they're not going to do that. Sharing, maybe you say our dog and they say my dog, and so on. So think about birth order in terms of perhaps who you date, and sometimes you'll see a clear effect of birth order in terms of that other person, and maybe they might see it in you. So it only makes sense to consider siblings after talking about birth order. Siblings are quite typically the longest significant relationship in life. And they vary considerably from being harmonious to being outright physically assaultive, hopefully not. They can provide a safety net after the parents pass, especially if that individual might have mental health issues or, for that matter, physical health issues. Only children lack this sense of family, community, and relationship. Let's consider gender identity. The gender nonconforming youth often struggle, just flat out often struggle with educational experience, with peers, with sometimes even a relationship with friends and family. They often face rejection and bullying, if not outright assault, and not just outside the home. Many of my gender nonconforming students share that they can't use their preferred name because of fear of parents finding out. They often have to conform within their house to gender norms because their parents will throw them out if they don't. And that's a legitimate fear. If you look at homeless youth, approaching half, I'm rounding up from 40%, approaching half of homeless youth are LGBTQ+, and 1 in 4 LGBTQ+ individuals will actually be homeless. I thought I should add more here in terms of violence and LGBTQ+ youth. Most of these youth will be victimized, bullied, assaulted, in other words. Around 85% will actually be between bullied and assaulted. For the trans or gender nonconforming youth, there's also a greatly increased risk of sexual assault. Lifetime risks, I don't seem to be able to find for the particular age group we're looking at, but over a lifetime, gender nonconforming and trans people, about half will be sexually assaulted, which is a mind-blowing statistic. And because of all these difficulties, gender nonconforming youth and adults have a much higher risk of suicide. About 1 in 3 gender nonconforming youths will actually attempt suicide. This isn't a problem with being gender nonconforming, but it's a problem with family and societal treatment of gender nonconforming people. If all these statistics are depressing you, well, good, they should, they depress me. What can you do? Well, gender nonconforming people and non-heterosexual people. Our society actually has a huge heterosexual bias. These people all need allies, so offer your allyship if you see somebody being harassed, if you see somebody in need of help, or just go to a pride club and just drop in as an ally, or to voice your disapproval, perhaps when discussing current events with your fellow students in terms of anti-trans legislation. So the little things do add up and should be undertaken. So maybe leave that as our parting idea in this particular slide. As of the time this slide was updated, August 2025 and early September 2025, the Trump administration is starting to pull millions in federal funding from any sex education program in public schools for merely mentioning gender identity or trans people. The gains that we've made for the LGBTQ plus communities since President Obama's legalization of gay marriage in 2015 are rapidly being lost, and quite in fact, we're in many areas behind where we were at that point. In 2015, there was no legislation for denying gender-affirming care to children, for example, banning physicians from even talking about it, banning parents from talking about it. So currently there's really an attack on this particular community, amongst others. Let's consider maternal employment both in terms of benefits and drawbacks. For most families, maternal employment is not open to debate. It's a necessity. The days of when dad worked and mom stayed home and was house mother and housewife have long left America for most families. There are distinct benefits for maternal employment to children. Children working moms typically score higher in self-esteem. They have left gender stereotype beliefs, so can see more of the potential for girls and women than children whose mothers stay home. They tend to achieve more in school. And the father tends to take more of an active role because mom is engaged in other things, so there's more of a stronger father relationship to the children. Drawbacks. We'll discuss next. Drawbacks would be difficulties associated with child care. What happens when the child is sick and a parent needs to be home? What happens when there's a school break or a summer break? And there's also the fiscal difficulties of child care. For children that are younger, pre-5, for each child, the family spends 18% of their total income. So one child, 18%. Two children, 36 if my quick math is correct, and so on. This is less so for children of middle childhood since they're going to school all day, so there would just be a very narrow window typically between when the parents, when the child gets out of school and the parents get home, assuming that the parents have a typical 8 to 5, 9 to 6 sort of job. The problem is that mom is still shouldering most of the child care, so she gets to work and she has to do extra work typically in the house and extra work associated with the children. So for mothers, it's particularly a difficult situation, but most do it admirably well and don't even think to the extra work that they experience compared to the male parent in some families, of course. So what does a working parent or parents do with children between the time the child gets out of school and the parent comes home from work? There's various options, of course. Some children are capable of self-care. They can safely, both emotionally and physically, take care of themselves. But it must be developmentally appropriate. Experts used to give ages, but now they refrain from doing so, typically looking at the child in terms of risky behaviors they get into or don't get into in terms of emotional distress or lack thereof. Sometimes these children are called latchkey children because they often wear the key to the house on a chain on their necks so not to lose it. Private care can be also taken, can be a person who's just paid to do it, a family member who volunteers, or for that matter, a family member that receives some sort of partial payment. There are also after-school programs, WISE, there's also locally there's Girls Inc. So there are different options for the parents, though unfortunately not nearly enough, and especially child care can be a major cost for parents in this particular country. In terms of Schenectady-based after-school programs, I just said the YWCA, and I should have said the YMCA. I did mention Girls Inc. I should also mention the Boys and Girls Club as well. These are all Schenectady-based after-school programs. Let's consider the effects of parental divorce, immediate and long-term. Approximately half of marriages end in divorce, so this is not at all a remote possibility. In terms of immediate effects, the family conflict can actually go up or down after the divorce occurs, depending on the parents' relationship. There's a large decrease in income if the house is a mother-headed house. 30% of mother-headed houses versus 15% of father-headed households, so big difference. Almost half of households will move into poverty after the divorce, the ones that weren't there already. So again, almost half will slide into poverty. There'll also be typically a large decrease in parenting skill because the parent, particularly this custodial parent, is very stressed out. If you heard the phrase bandwidth, has less bandwidth to offer. The children are often acting out, which brings out his or her worst parenting skills and vice versa. So it can be an unfortunate circle. Also, in terms of immediate effects, there's a loss of routine, which is a destabilizing force for everybody. The child's reaction will vary according to their age, their sex, and their temperament, but self-blame for the divorce itself is extremely common. In terms of long-term, things in the household will get better, but typically not until 2 years. So not at 1 year, but typically at 2 years, things will start getting decidedly better. There's often a long-term decrease in academic functioning, self-esteem, and social ability. That child in the future, as a teen or as a young adult, is more likely to engage in substance abuse, experience an anxiety or mood disorder, and that's just to name a few. These children later on down the road will also be more likely to engage in unprotective sex and also come into the law in terms of being a violator. And all these are obviously very negative, but the effects of staying into a family dynamic which is unhealthy and aggressive is even worse. So view it in terms of that context. So parents can do many things to help their children adjust to the divorce. First of all, explain what's going on. It's amazing how many parents avoid the issues of the day, whether it's a national issue, a local issue, a world issue. Children are afraid and often don't ask. They need to have things explained to them, especially including that they are not the cause of the divorce and the parents will always love them. Parents need to shield the child from conflict rather than using as a pawn in the conflict. And as much as possible, provide continuity in their daily life. Even though it's going to be hard and the child is probably going to be acting out, use your best parenting skills. No matter what your feelings with the other parent, promote contact with the other parent, and don't diss the other parent, use the child as a weapon, or try to get the child to take your side in the matter. After divorce, there's often a remarriage, so let's consider the step or blended family. 60% of parents will remarry, so this is an often experienced situation. Step or blended families are generally more complicated. The mother and stepfather combination is most common. In terms of adjuster by sex and gender, boys tend to adjust better and younger children tend to adjust better. Worst adjusters tend to be girls and teens. You'll tend to see more acting out and also more problems with sexuality. Which blended families tend to be the most successful? Those parents that have waited at least 2 years after divorce. Starting a new family too soon can cause, when the child is still processing or feeling, is sabotaging perhaps that future relationship for all. Don't picture the Brady Bunch, that perfect family. Typically takes many years, up to 10, to that family to fully bond. Even in the beginning, though, as a parent, you should insist on respect. They don't have to view you as your parent, but they have to respect you as the partner of their spouse, or the partner of their parent. And don't try to force your kids to take a side in your divorce, because that can trickle its way into the next relationship and next family as well. In the previous slide, we suggested that most children aren't getting enough physical exercises. Part of the problem, clearly, not all schools have PE classes. 25% don't. Most children aren't walking to school. Most children aren't playing outside. What are they doing in all their free time? I'm sure you know, social media. So how much is too much? Consider both these quotes below. Which one do you think comes from the AAP? And as a review, what did we say the AAP stood for again? So read them and decide which one do you think you want to vote for. Well, let's start with the acronym. First one is American Academy of Pediatrics. In terms of which quote, they're actually both from the AAP. The first one was prior to 2023, and 2023 they changed it to the bottom one. So actually both. So when you visit a doctor, what sort of questions are they asking before they get to the symptom that brought you in? Mine asks, do I feel safe? Which I like. It's asking about domestic violence. Have I fallen lately? Probably ask more of older people than younger people. Question geared to assess whether I'm depressed or not. I like them asking that too. But if you're a parent, it's typical that pediatricians will ask a question about screen time. Consider all of the following negative associations with excessive screen time use in children. This list is from the AACAP, which you do not need to know what this one stands for, but this is the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists. So let's take a look at this list. Watching violence, which can desensitize a child, but they could also be cyberbullied. And unfortunately, some children have committed suicide due to cyberbullying, or gets them exposed to potential child sexual predators. Videos of stunts inspiring rather unsafe behavior. Sexual content which they're not ready for, or drug use content. Negative stereotypes about other groups of people. Lower grades in school and reading fewer books. If you're spending between 5.5 and 6 hours on social media use per day, doesn't leave a lot of time for reading at this age. Advertising aimed at the child. So as parents, whenever a child wants anything, one should try to determine where this want came from and see if it's just social media advertisement or all their friends have it on social media. Less time with family and friends. Less time spent learning other ways to relax and have fun that don't require a device in your hand. Sleep problems, and not just insomnia, but a variety of sleep problems. Not enough outdoor and physical activities where we began our journey here. Being overweight or actually obese and or having poor body images. Disorders of mental illnesses, including but not limited to mood or anxiety problems, or the prominent fear apparently of missing out. And this is not a complete list, but extensive, admittedly. So certainly parents aren't helpless in this regard. This is currently part of just modern parenting. First of all, talk to your child about what they are seeing. Point out good behaviors that you would like to see more of, such as cooperation, friendship, concern for others. Be aware of how advertising is influencing your child and their choices. Encourage your child to do other activities as well. Think of some other activities other than being on the cell phone. This might also include you too, by the way. So what other activities? Playing with neighborhood kids, sports, music, arts, hobbies, walks in nature. Set a good example for yourself with healthy screen habits. Surely you can't ask them to do what you're not doing yourself. Teach children about online privacy and safety. Also, create in your house or home screen-free times, hopefully just before bedtime within an hour, at family meals, and hopefully in the bathroom where they can be doing all sorts of things out of your sight on the phone. Also create screen-free zones, such as bedrooms and bathrooms. Screens in public areas are far easier to monitor. And depending on the age of the child, use parental control on the devices to limit either screen time or to restrict certain content, which is being pictured on the bottom here. Hopefully a number of them, including modeling good screen habits yourself and finding other things to do other than using the screen, such as talk with your family and share your day. Somewhat recently, I've seen warnings about children being on online games and chat rooms designed for their own age. Pedophiles are getting in, posing as children, leading to disastrous consequences. Some games encourage online betting and tell the kids to go get your parents' credit card. So parents assume that these are safe formats, and yet nothing further can be from the truth. So if your child or your siblings or your cousins are online, borrow the game and explore the features. Does it give them access to interact with others? That can be highly concerning, to say the least. So the child's frontal cortex is developing, in particular the prefrontal cortex, in middle childhood, and that's going to, in part, influence the child's moral understanding. They'll learn to be more flexible in their moral rules. Lying is not always bad. If it keeps from hurting somebody's feelings, maybe puts them in danger. Truthfulness is not always good. It can hurt people's feelings. It can sometimes do no good and a lot of harm. So an increased understanding of the gray zones of life rather than being distinctly right or distinctly wrong. So how can we study lying in the laboratory? Something called the temptation resistance paradigm. The children come into a room with a box on the table. The researchers say, there's toys in the box, but please do not look at the toys or play with them. Then they leave the room and watch. And depending on the age, you'll get different results, of course. If you look at 3-year-olds, around 80% or so will peek. It's kind of surprising that more don't, but about 80% will peek. And about 1/3 will lie about the peeking. Did you peek? The child says yes or no. Simple grading. So again, most will peek and 1/3 will lie. Now if you do it with 6-year-olds, almost all will peek and almost all will lie about it. An interesting sub-result they found, of the children, the younger children that did not peek, almost half will say that they did. Specifically, 40% would say, yes, I peeked. So the researchers, in trying to explain that, thought that maybe it's just a general tendency to be agreeable to adults. If they ask you something, then you should probably agree to it. Unfortunately, even if you didn't. So considering this, if you're getting children to fess up about behaviors that they did or did not do. Now, effective lying requires that the child have a theory of mind that they can place themselves in the mind of the other. Young children are moderately deficient in this, obviously, so before age 4, very, very limited ability to do so. So, for example, one researcher shared that her child yelled down spontaneously, "I'm all dressed and ready to go to school, so I'm going to play outside." Then she looks outside and the child's in the pajamas. Clearly the child, that was a 5 or 6-year-old child, had theory of mind, so knew that the parent could not see them, and the lie would be effective in terms of giving them more time to play outside. But it can also be used, for that matter, for pro-social behavior. The same researcher also shared that that same child, when she was frantically going around the house looking for her cell phone, had figured out what she was looking for and said, "The cell phone's in the spoon drawer. I saw, Jimmy, the little brother, put in there earlier." So the theory of mind can be either used to facilitate lying or to facilitate pro-social behavior. Some researchers suggest for the preschool child, particularly the 2 or 3-year-old, that when they say the falsehood, it's more of a wish of what was true. I wish I didn't do that, so that's what I'll say. So not the act of actually fabricating a lie because we are unhappy with reality, but just focusing on the wish that it wasn't true and not necessarily the falsehood of it. Another type of lie that might occur in preschool is the fantasy lie. I went to the moon last night. So again, not to the lie characteristics that we would associate with lying. Lying will increase in age across the elementary school years. 3-year-olds will lie less than 6-year-olds, and so on. The increase in lying is for various reasons. In part, it's to maybe test boundaries with adults, but another part reflects a developmental ability that's increasing, the TOM, theory of mind. To effectively tell a lie, you've got to be able to place yourself in the mind of the other person. In the next bullet, we'll give a couple examples shared by a researcher on this theory of mind as it relates to lying or even pro-social behavior. So most parents fairly quickly learn that lying is inevitable. So what should parents do? Well, first of all, model honesty yourself. Verbalize the importance of honesty to you and your family and your dislike of lying. But then again, teach them that they do not need to share everything. Oh, that's an ugly sweater. Oh, that person looks funny. Whatever. So not saying everything that comes to your mind is not the same thing as lying. If the child is doing a fantasy lie, preschool in particular, I went to the moon last night. Well, then simply ask them, did you really go to the moon? Or do you wish you went there? So wishes are good, but we always have to remember the difference between wishing and real. So gently sneak that in whenever they give you this fantasy lie. For real lies, let them know that they should reconsider what they just said, because if they are lying, you'll give them not only the punishment for the misdeed, but you'll give them a secondary punishment for lying. So why don't you think about it for a moment, and then I'll listen again to what you want to tell me. So definitely insist on that punishment for lying. So we visited Kohlberg's theory of moral development before. We looked at the Heinz dilemma. Let's look through the context of age now. So in middle childhood, we will expect the child to be through the punishment and self-benefit stage. If the child is still in those stages, there's a distinct possibility they might stay in those stages. Clearly, not everybody leaves stage 1 or stage 2. Consider, in all seriousness, the people that go to jail and stay in jail. Their reasoning centers around not getting punished or what benefits them. So pre-moral pre-conventional, as Kohlberg would call it. We would expect the bulk of children in the middle childhood to be either in stage 3 or stage 4. Indeed, that is by far the most common stage for adults to be in. Relatively few adults reach what's called the post-conventional moral reasoning. So if you're going to do it the level-wise, stage 1 and 2 are pre-conventional level, stages 3 and 4 are conventional level of moral reasoning, and stages 5 and 6 are post-conventional. Only about 20% of people reach the post-conventional level, so we would expect on that basis alone that most of our people in middle childhood will be in stages 3 or stages 4. If you need to listen to that twice, go ahead. It might be useful.